everything, I said anything and everything. La la la, join us to talk about everything and anything.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Anything and Everything, the show which acknowledges that everyone has a story. I'm your host and producer, Halima Sharif. I'm honored to bring you another segment of our New Orleans Music Legends series, where we have had amazing conversations with Edward Kidd Jordan and his daughter Rachel, Jermaine Basil, Victor Goines, Donald Harrison Jr., Nicholas Payton, Herlin Riley, Shannon Powell, James Andrews, Garrett Morris, and today, we have the amazing, the legendary, the two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee, composer and pianist, Mr. Roger Dickerson Sr. Welcome, Mr. Dickerson. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me on your show.
Oh, definitely, definitely. You have such an amazing journey, and I'm delighted and honored to have you.
Well, it's indeed a pleasure for me to be on with you because we do have earlier connections.
Right. But before we get started, I'd like to read your bio to everyone. Roger Dickerson's musical quest began as a boy involved in formal piano lessons while listening to music in the streets of New Orleans. The two musical traditions easily embraced within Dickerson's inner sensibilities. His studies have taken him throughout America, Europe, the Middle East, and China. Over the years, Dickerson's musical compositions have received national and international attention. He is a recipient of numerous awards and commissions, including Pulitzer nominations for both his A Musical Service for Louis, A Requiem of Louis Armstrong in 1972, and New Orleans Concerto for Piano and Orchestra in 1971, premiered by Maestro Werner Torkanowski and the New Orleans Philharmonic Orchestra. A 60-minute documentary film of New Orleans Concerto aired as a PBS special via WETA-TV in Washington, D.C. for national television in 1977. The film documentary has been recently restored and digitized. Recent premieres of Dickerson's work include For the Love of Jesus, Wilmington Symphony Orchestra, February 2007, written and dedicated as a part of the Vatican's canonization process for Henrietta DeLille, foundress of the Sisters of the Holy Family in New Orleans, and A Flower Blooms in the Desert, commissioned by the Pecos Valley Jazz and Arts Festival of Roswell, New Mexico, where Dickerson landed as an evacuee from Hurricane Katrina and became a founding father in 2006 of the Roswell Jazz Festival. Roger Dickerson is an honors graduate of Dillon University, bachelor's 1955, received an MM degree in composition, Indiana University 1957, and attended the Academy for Music and Deutschland Kunst in Vienna, Austria, 1959-1962, as a Fulbright Scholar. In 1990, the Minority Nationalities Institute of the Republic of China honored Dickerson with an honorary doctorate degree. Dickerson, presently retired, served as music coordinator and university choir director at Southern University at New Orleans. Earlier appointments include Dillon University, Xavier University of New Orleans, and the Institute of Services to Education, Washington, D.C. In recent years, Dickerson, as an associate in composition, has worked with students in the Louis Satchmo Armstrong Summer Jazz Camp and the Thelonious Monk Institute at Loyola University of New Orleans. The composer currently is nearing the completion of his Symphony Congo Square, a large symphonic work. He looks forward as well to Xavier University of New Orleans' commitment to stage a full premiere production of Preacher Man, his musical comedy written with playwright John O'Neill. Next year, well, actually next year is already this year, so I don't know, you said 2019. The book and musical score are both deeply rooted in the culture and traditions of 1947 New Orleans. A full evening production it is in 3 acts, 11 scenes. Once again, welcome to the amazing Mr. Roger Dickerson. It is such an honor.
Thanks for having me here.
Oh, definitely, definitely. You know, Mr. Dickerson, you are, I said this earlier, but you really are a true legend. And I'm so honored to know you. I have such fond memories, especially because when my parents realized I wanted to play the piano after playing by ear for so long, my father said, you know, you're going to take lessons with Roger Dickerson. So I think I must have been like 14 or 15 years old. So thank you for what you taught me, even though I'm not playing really right now. But hey, I want to thank you anyway.
Well, I'm very only was too happy to work with you and to have known your father, and of course, in recent years, to have gotten to meet your son, Jolini.
Yes, right.
And he had composition lessons with me.
Yes, he speaks very fondly of you. Mr. Dickerson, would you take me through your childhood? Share some of your most fondest memories. When would you say music inspired you to be where you are today and now?
Well, let me start out by saying first that I don't know where I am. Okay, I only know that I'm deeply involved in music and have been for many years, and it all started in my earlier years in New Orleans. I grew up in a household that had music all the time. None of my family members were professional musicians, but everyone could do something, could play the piano, could sing. And my parents, my grandparents had friends who were professional musicians who came to the house. And then a professional musician married into my family, a cousin, Wallace Davenport was his name, a trumpet player. And there were musicians who lived in the neighborhood around the corner, up the block, and I would see them leaving, going for gigs in their white shirts and dark pants and caps. And so it was always there. I've never known life in New Orleans without music. So it kind of, its beginning is it was there when I came on this planet.
Yes.
And it has been an influence in my life ever since. Of course, first from the music that surrounded me and the culture of my parents, and then the New Orleans culture, the music of the streets, the music that I heard. I lived just on the edge of Treme on Claiborne Street in the 200 block, just above Canal Street. I don't know exactly where the borderline for Treme is, but I consider myself as being a part of Treme. And of course, I went to school in Treme at McDonald 37 and then Wicker Elementary School, which is on Bienville and Derbany streets.
You know, you're saying a lot of what I've been hearing from other musicians from our hometown. You know, the Treme, the different influences of the music, the culture, and whether you grew up to be a musician or not, it was still a part of our upbringing. So it was something that was just a part of our fabric. Can you speak on memories of the New Orleans music scene from your early childhood and adulthood?
Sure. We lived in Claiborne between Palmyra and Cleveland Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, save on Mardi Gras Day or any other festival time, parades came down Claiborne Avenue, and particularly for Mardi Gras. The main street for blacks in New Orleans for Mardi Gras was Claiborne, coming down, connecting from up at Jackson or above, all the way down to Claiborne and St. Bernard. And all I needed to do was sit on my front porch and I could see everybody and everything. You see, even as a kid before I could get out and wander about in the crowd, my mother would put a little face on me and I would have maybe a little mariachi hat on and I was put on the front stoop on the steps and I wasn't supposed to move. And I watched Mardi Gras go by. And I could see the Zulus, I could see the skull men, everything. Of course, whenever I saw them, I would run in my backyard. And then becoming older, I was able to then go off and mingle in the crowds with my friends. And I can remember after Ellis and I became fast friends, we met at St. James AME Church. That's one of the oldest Protestant Black churches there. Slaves built that church on Roman Street near Bienville, which is just around the corner from my school, Wicker Elementary School. He and I met there one Sunday and became fast friends, where we started talking about music, and of course, and we were still talking about music the week before he left this planet, and back in March. We were planning to get together to listen to some music and watch some scores. And so after I was old enough to walk about, and then I had friends like Ellis, we would walk down that strip from Claiborne Avenue between Canal and St. Bernard at least 24 times on Mardi Gras Day, and you could hear bands, and the whole bit was there for you. And of course, at other times during the year, New Orleans is a very festive city. There were many opportunities to hear musicians, live music all the time, you see. So there was this constant exposure. And of course, I became interested in the music and wanted to learn to play. And about I think 6 or 7, my mother got me a piano teacher, Mrs. Miriam Pennell, who was my first piano teacher, who lived just around the corner from me on Roman Street near Tulane Avenue. And the piano lessons were about 50 cents a lesson, I think, something like that. And I started taking piano about that age, and soon began to learn to read music. Of course, I was already playing, as we say. I learned to play some tunes, and some friends of my family had given me some instruction on how to play certain tunes, and I had discovered how to play certain tunes myself because we had a piano in the house, and every relative, close relative that I had a piano in the house. All of my aunts and my grandmother's sisters, everywhere we went, there was a piano because people had pianos in those days. Of course, that was before the advent of television and all of that stuff. So you could entertain yourself, and that's exactly what the family did. And I learned to play. So after learning to read and getting into school, I started to accompany for the school festivities, things like the May Festival, and which introduced me to opportunities to perform in public that I didn't have before, which primarily was performing at church and with Mrs. Pennell's, with her studio. She would give these recitals of the Pennell studio, and usually that was in a church somewhere.
Wow, that's an amazing history. I'm just looking at the different timeline, especially as you mentioned, Mr. Ellis Marsalis, and you all meeting earlier on before you even got into the music.
Yeah, we were in Sunday school. That's his parents and my parents and grandparents. We all went to the same church, St. James AME Church, there on Roman Street.
So in what ways did the two of you impact each other's development as men and as artists?
Well, tremendously. You know, to have a friend who is close is one thing because you share all kinds of things, but we both had this zeal, this great interest in music. And of course, that became the tremendous cohesive almost and the center of much that we did, because we were talking about music, we were learning music, we were doing things together musically. He played the clarinet and saxophones, And of course, I was playing the piano, and after I got to high school, and then started to play a French horn and then the baritone horn, which I used primarily in the marching band and that sort of thing. The piano was for the music that we were doing for outside of school music. And of course, we started soon to play gigs, and then I became interested in writing, and I knew how to find things on the piano. And I discovered after learning to read, I could write many of the things down. And of course, it was during those days that Wallace Davenport came into my family. He married my cousin. And so my mother spoke to him about helping us out. And so Wallace showed me how to transpose for instruments, for B flat and E flat instruments. And he wrote a few little pieces for arrangements for us. And I discovered how to do it. And so I started doing it. And that was the beginning of my writing. And then the band got larger, and then I started to arrange for more instruments and learn how to write for them. I was still in high school when I was doing this.
Wow. So you had a network of resources with the friendship with Ellis Marsalis and with Wallace Davenport. And speaking of friendship, I recently interviewed actor Garrett Morris, and he spoke so highly of you and Mr. Marsalis.
Oh, I remember him fondly, right?
Yeah. What was that meeting like? He's so hilarious.
Well, when he arrived at Dillard, I think he'd been in Booker T. Washington
Yes.
high school, and he came to Dillard, and we were upperclassmen, and I think I was a junior or a senior. And we got to know him, and he was a great person. You know, we was not about this upper class, freshman stuff. I mean, he was somebody who was in our music building and who was taking courses and who was very talented. And so that was a binder.
Awesome. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you something. A Black American composer in the orchestral realm is a subject that has been heavily neglected. Can you share some light on some great Black American composers, including ones who have impacted you?
Well, I would just say first that, every aspect of American society has been affected by American apartheid. And so the symphonic world, the world of formal music, isn't any different than any other sector. Right. While there may be certain kinds of things that certain sections of societies pretend to have, they are still part of that conflation of things that come out being the kind of, different forms of apartheid. And so it's built into the whole system as it is in other systems. And of course, there are many Blacks who transcend the system and who the system has to bow to and who get in because, their talents are just so formidable. And it could be in track, it could be in boxing, it could be in music, it could be in anything where we have these people. And so we have those musicians and those composers who have gotten their music performed because they are those kind of really Superman talents, that exist in all the different disciplines. For a person who is of average talent, it's very difficult for anything to happen for them. In the orchestra or with that music, that genre of performance music, formal music particularly, we're talking about. And so there is some turnover, some development, as we see in other areas, and basketball and football. Now we're having, at one time there wasn't one quarterback in National Football League, and now we've got a bunch of quarterbacks. And so now we're beginning to have some conductors in symphonic music, and I suspect we'll have more, but there's yet a lot of work to be done all around, you know. And some areas have moved much farther ahead of others. I think the symphonic, the formal music world has quite a bit of catching up to do.
I agree with you, you know, and I guess that, you know, over the years, and I'm sure you've experienced quite a bit of, you know, half and half of different situations, different circumstances, but especially with the influence of diversity and inclusion,
Right.
you know, just changing the landscape. It's a process, and you're right, you know, we've come a long way, but there's still much more work to do.
Right.
So I mentioned in my introduction that you're a two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee. What an honor to be nominated twice in that category. What was that like for you?
Well, you know, it's a good feeling, you know, but I try to keep my head even and on balance, and things like that, which can tempt you to identify more with something that, you know, I refer to as ego. I try to stay
Yeah.
away from, you know, but it's some way of getting a notion of, well, I don't really need someone to tell me what I'm doing musically. You know, it's nice if other people have some idea of things that I already know that I'm doing something, just that it's important. You know, it's beyond ordinary or just something that's pop or something like that. That the music has a certain kind of cultural weight to it. But unfortunately, again, I have to go back to the discussion that we just had, because everything in this society, it's touched by all of the notions of apartheid and kind of and the kind of cultural arrogance that comes along with that, and condescension, you see, which has no place in any aspect of real life, everyday relationships between men anywhere on the planet, and women.
Listen, I totally understand where you're coming from. I mean, it just reminds me of a conversation I had earlier on with Miss Jermaine Basil. You both are very humble, you know, even though we think you're a legend, you know, you've done a lot of great things in the industry, but at the same time, you never want to lose yourself. So I totally
Right.
understand that. You never want to lose yourself. And you're doing what you enjoy doing. You know, that's one of the things she said to me. I'm doing what I love doing. And that does make a difference. And the impact that it may have on someone else's life or yours is a beautiful thing. So, hey, I totally understand. So, Mr. Dickerson, being someone who has written many extensive creative works, can you speak about your relationship with the process of creating? Would you say your relationship with the creative process something you have consciously thought about? And if so, how has your perspective on the creative process evolved over the years?
Well, you know, to begin with, you know, creating, composing, writing music wasn't something that I thought about before doing it. It's something that I discovered that I was doing it after doing it. I started doing it first, you know, and it was out of just a desire to want to do something like that. Now, where that comes from, I don't know. But one day I discovered that I could write something. I had already written it, and then decided to write other things. And so it wasn't like you decide first, and then it happens. And even with compositions, you know, sometimes you think you're deciding to write a piece, and it's already started writing itself before you thought about it, say. Um, so where the process starts, and you know, even where it ends, because one piece goes into the next piece.
Yes.
And so for me, you know, I I believe that my work, I mean, getting more to the how I see this, I believe that my work is an expression of inner devotion and freedom, an expression that combines a love of art with human relationships, and also with a sense of godly duty. And I see my my creativity, that is the actual process of doing it, I see that as a release of my spiritual self,
Hmm.
and all that that self reflects of the conscious and the unconscious worlds that we all live in and move through. It is an constant experience.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I mean, I feel like that needs to be some type of poetic moment. You know, and you're right. You know, just knowing you personally, hearing your music, hearing your style, there's a sense of spirituality that's coming from it. It's your own personal spirituality and your personal freedom. And I'm sure in other composers and other artists, you know, they probably may express it in their own personal way as well, and how that has affected them and their sense of freedom. So that's a very much in-depth explanation. I appreciate that. Um, you have taught some amazing students, such as trumpeter, composer, and educator Terence Blanchard, and composer, producer, conductor, arranger Jay Weigel. What were they like as students?
Well, they're students.
They're still students,
Right.
of course.
You know, people ask me all the time about Jay and Terence and other students of mine who made big names for themselves, and um, they were all good students. And students are different, and particularly the way I deal with students and and my classes, particularly composition, where you're trying to get at or try to help the person get in touch with him, herself, and with their own creativity, and which is something that is as different as they are from anybody else. And so while there are certain common things that I use with them, it's all toward getting at their individuality or helping them to find things that are peculiar to themselves, and helping them to become aware of these special characteristics that, you know, and not trying to imitate or do something exactly like someone else. So you can to learn something, you know, but you want to do it in a way that has your fingerprints on it, in a way that reflects those things which have to do with your sensitivities, what the student sensitivities. And so each of these students, Jay Weigel and Terence Blanchard and others, they have been able to go on their particular way, on their own way, and discover and really make a success far beyond my imagination of what they might possibly do, you know. I have little techniques and things that I use. Is one that I use with a phrase like, if I could tell you, I would. They all know that phrase because they all get that. It's just a tool. It's sort of like um, um, the slide rule, you know, that people used in math and in chemistry before calculators came along. And the slide rule could do calculating for you. All calculus could do square root, could do all sorts of things, but you had to know how to use it, you see. And then you have to become creative with it. And so I've used this common tool with them, but it's up to them to use it in their special creative way to make it their own, and which is the secret of finding the full use of the device. Like if I could tell you, I would.
Exactly. I like that. How does that make you feel? I mean, in your modesty, you know, looking at Jay, looking at Terrence, and they've done some amazing work in the film industry and scores and just so many other areas. How does that make you feel? That's look at your students, and I guess the answer is, if you know, your statement you always say, if I could tell you, I would. But I guess they were able to tell you, and they're still telling.
Right, and Terrence did a recording. He told me. Making use of some of that little tool, which was, I think the title was, I Would If I Could.
Oh, wow, I like that, I like that. Can you speak on your time living abroad, as well as elaborate on your experience of returning to the U.S. after being away for such an extended amount of time?
Sure. While I was away, it was about 6 years in all. I would say, because I spent time away in the military.
Yes.
After getting out of graduate school, I was drafted into the military and went into a band training unit after basic training, and found myself in the USARA headquarters band in Heidelberg, Germany, which was just a great place to be. You know, it was just wonderful. It was USARA headquarters, and it was the band, Army band, and we traveled all over and did everything. You know, we went to the Middle East when the war was there in Beirut, and that was in 57, I think, something like that. We went there right after, and we played for the troops. They had taken over the Beirut airport, and we were playing in the trees that they have in Lebanon, the olive trees.
Yes, I love those.
Right. And,
Clever.
right. And swimming in the Mediterranean every day. And then we went to other places, similar kinds of duty, not connected with war, but for applying for the unknown soldier in France at the cemeteries there, and in Tivoli Gardens. And of course, this was during the time when Germany was separated. There was West and East Germany, and there were lots of meetings between the generals, Russian and American generals, and we often played for those meetings and cocktail parties and concerts and things like that, which were held in places like down in southern Germany. And I can't think of the name of the town just now, but anyway, it'll come to me. But we would go there and perform and then go skiing and stuff like that, because that was a place where lots of skiing was being done. So I'm getting to some experiences coming out of New Orleans. That's where I'm going with this. I mean, I never, you know, I didn't see snow until I was in graduate school. And so being in Europe and then traveling all over with the USARA band and going to all of these little towns, and then going and performing in Tivoli Gardens, and just going to the Middle East and going to Italy. And then we were, of course, having opportunities to have leave of absence from the band and go on vacation for a week or two. And many of us bought cars and things like that. And of course, I did buy a Volkswagen. I was playing gigs, and then I was teaching the kids of the generals and colonels, and so I had a bank account. So that was my first experience in Europe, and then after that was for about a year and a half or so because I applied for the Fulbright while I was in the military, and I got it. And then I got an early release, and then came back to New Orleans and got all of my academic stuff, books and stuff, and I went back to Vienna. And so I was there for like 3 years or so. And the experience was quite different than while being in the military. But I was in Europe now. I was a student rather than a military soldier. So that made an incredible difference in, of course, living on the economy. And of course, studying at the Akademie für Musik und Darstellende Kunst. That was the State Academy for Music and Acting, Darstellende acting classes. And so meeting students from all over the world because Vienna is a musical center. And of course, it was still during the time of the East and West Germany, and we had lots of students coming from Hungary and other East European countries studying in Vienna. And then I got to know a lot of students who were some in my class, composition class, and it was just incredible. And getting to spend time with these students, and by that time my German was pretty good, and then talking to people in another language, and we all had great fun with this. That we were all speaking another tongue, and then being able to communicate with somebody from a different culture, which is a great feeling. And of course, being in a city with a great musical heritage like Vienna, walking the same streets that Beethoven walked, and Mozart, and Wolf, and how many other composers. And it just was an incredible experience for me. And of course, having a chance to travel on breaks from school, and I went primarily to Italy to visit many of the top sites, like to Rome and to Pisa and to Bologna and to Florence. And one summer we drove the entire Dalmatian coast all the way down to Dubrovnik and then into Greece and to Epidaurus. And it was just an incredible experience. And of course, visiting all of the cathedrals and going to concerts in these places. And of course, these were places for me who were kind of the fountainhead of Western culture and European culture, and getting a personal experience with all of that, and being around, and the great works of paintings and sculpture of Michelangelo and other great artists. We never missed going to cathedrals. I never did, to see these kinds of things. So it was an education that, was beyond anything I could really put a yardstick on, and it just set in course a kind of activity which is still going on today, a kind of dynamic that I'm still feeding off of in terms of having a kind of a touchstone, a kind of a way of reference for understanding and perceiving things in these conscious and unconscious worlds I referred to.
Wow, I'm just imagining the different places you visited. You mentioned Vienna, and considering you're a composer and being there at that time so long ago, and looking at your life now, the transformation and the fact that you were there, it was like those spirits were there.
Right, exactly.
Energy was there. And I'm sure that that impacted you immensely then and now, and as you continue. That must
Yes, exactly. And of course, the people, composers I met while I was there, of course, composers I studied with uh, at the academy, Professor Uhl
Mm-hmm.
and Professor Dr. Carl Schiska, um, who was the state composer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I, of course, got to meet Howard Swanson, who was a black composer who was traveling at that time between France, Paris, France, and Vienna every year. He'd spend certain months of the year in each place. And I knew about him before I got there. And then I met some friends who were personal friends of his and finally got to meet him. And we became friends, Howard and I, we became very close friends. And then getting to meet my teacher's teacher, my teacher uh, in graduate school was Haydn, Bernard Haydn at Indiana University, where I did my master's. He was a student of Paul Hindemith, who's the German composer. And of course, when I was there in Vienna, Paul Hindemith came and he was having concerts and I went to see him and got to meet him. I was doing a radio concert one Sunday morning and I went backstage after at the radio station and told him where I was. And he was just happy to hear that I had studied with his student and asked about Haydn. And then the next year, he was being honored by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra for his 65th birthday. And I went backstage, and this was at the Musikverein in Vienna, where that was taking place. And so I went to the green room, which is an incredible green room in Vienna, has these incredible places. They're like palaces, you know? And there was a gentleman standing at the door and people were trying to get out and the door was shut. And so I was standing there, he opened the door and beckoned to me and he let me in. So I got in the green room and there was this huge line in this palace-like room of folks lined up to say something to Paul Hindemith after this concert where he had conducted the Vienna Philharmonic. When I got up to him, he looked at me, he says, "You're still here."
Oh.
Yeah, he remembered me and then we had a short talk and of course then I had to move along because the line was behind me. But he remembered me from that past year. It was really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would have been in awe, you know, just listening to these names. These are some great composers. This opportunity to be in their presence must have been absolutely amazing. Which leads me to my next question, and you've already mentioned it. You know, who are some of your influencers and mentors? Now, you've mentioned a few names, but are there others that you would like to share?
Oh yeah, from the very beginning, I would have to say Miriam Pennell. She was my first piano teacher. You know, she just did all kinds of wonderful things for me. I was just a little kid who had learned to play the boogie on the piano and some other pieces. Some of my mother's friends taught me how long blues and stuff like that, and I could play them, you know. And then she had me reading. You know, I was reading and I could play, and so she was a great influence on me. My first music teacher. And of course, I would say as I moved along, there were these key people in my life. In college, Melville Bryant, who's at Dillard University, who played a major role in my life and practically, well, Ellis, everybody was around. And he was a director of, in addition to teaching at Dillard, he was an officer. He was the officer for a black unit at Camp Leroy Johnson, which is on the Lake Pontchartrain
Mm-hmm.
at Camp Leroy Johnson. And there was a black band there was and I joined that band. I mean, everybody was in that band. Alvin Batiste, Harold Batiste, Clarence Ford, Dalton Rousseau. I mean, just Tony Moret, your dad knew all these people.
Yes.
And of course, it was the band, the BN, and so it was a reserve band, Army Reserve Band. And Melville Bryant, who taught at Dillard, he was the director of that band. So that's why I got in that band. And of course, because of Bryant and his connections and advice, I went to Indiana University. He was from Gary, Indiana. And while he was at Dillard, he was working on his doctorate at Indiana University. And so when I graduated from Dillard, I ended up at Indiana University to work on a master's degree. And it's because of Bryant, you see.
Oh, full circle.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so leaving, of course, at Indiana, then I met there was a whole group of professors who were very important to my development, like Bernard Haydn and Thomas Beaversdorf, who I studied orchestration with, great people. Finishing the master's, I ended up in the military, and of course, while I was in the military, I was writing music. I wrote a piece for the band, essay for band, while I was at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and then moved on to got orders to go to Europe. Of course, when I got to meet Professor Shiska and Uhl, and of course, Howard Swanson, who was a person who had a great influence on my life. After I met him, I stopped going for weeks to the Music Academy. I was hanging out with Howard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right. He was talking in a way that I had never heard anybody talk about music and about creativity. And none of my teachers in the academic classes talked like that, you know. And I learned, I'm still discovering stuff and understanding stuff that he told me back then as we walked through the streets of Vienna in the late 50s and early 60s.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes back to the front of the table. Who would you say are some unsung heroes of New Orleans?
Well, there are many, you know, teachers, players, people who, for whatever reason, did not get a fair shot at recognition and that kind of thing. I guess one can say there's always these unsung heroes, you know, everywhere and in every discipline. And I'm coming to learn that that's kind of how things are, you know, no matter where you find yourself among groups, that there are people who are carrying tremendous loads, doing important stuff, and the main work and not caring about being known or anything like that. It's just that they are taking care of things that they know that they're supposed to do, and that if they don't do, nobody else will do.
That's true. And you know, there are really too many names to mention.
Exactly right. That's why I'm not trying to talk.
No, I understand. I mean, there's just too many names to mention because there are many, and not just musicians, but teachers, educators, and just
Exactly right.
matter.
I can remember a lady at St. James AME Church who I can see her almost now. And she would, on Sundays, she came to get me and my uncle, he was a couple of years older than me, and to bring us to Sunday school.
Mhm.
And she would go around to different people's houses and get them and then bring you back home if your parents didn't come to church. You know, and this was a lady who's just, and she just, nobody asked her to do that, you know. You know, I often think about her and then people like that, you know, and it's not unlike, you know, artists who apply the highest standards to what they do in terms of doing work of excellence without expecting any return from what they're doing. They're writing a story, or they're creating a composition, or they're doing a painting, or whatever it is, something that they're doing for a higher cause, a more noble cause, than how much I'm going to get for this, or, you know, what kind of price can I put on it, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. You mentioned earlier both of my parents, because you knew both of my mom and my dad.
Right.
Then my mother graduated from Dillard in 1950. I think she was in one of the first class of nurses. But you know my father very well, and I always ask this question when I'm interviewing folks. What are some of your memories of my dad?
Well, he was a very talented man, you know, and he was the first trumpet player. Let me just go there. You know, he had quite a lip, and he was at Southern University when I met him, and I was at Dillard. And it was at the time when Alice and I was starting to discover the musicians up at Southern, and because we were going up there now. I don't know if, Southern did play Dillard occasionally, the football teams, but I don't think that was, I guess it must have been on a yearly basis, but I remember the year that they came to New Orleans, and I remember a couple of times we went up to Southern. We didn't have a great marching band at Dillard like Southern had it, you know. We finally, I think one year did get a little something there. The music department was small. But I got to know the musicians up there, and of course, especially him, because he was one of the main people. And then he was in New Orleans. I remember, I don't know if it was a rehearsal or a gig we were on. It was a big band, and I had one of my big band arrangements, and he played it. He played the first trumpet part on it. I remember that. Night and Day, I think that was. That was an arrangement I did for the band, for the Camp Leroy Johnson band that I was in with Clarence Ford and Harold Batiste and all those guys. And I remember him playing the lead trumpet and the comments he made about it to me on it. But he was an incredible person, you know, a real first trumpet player, and he could play, you know. And I was always, you know, any persons who had great talent like that, I mean, Alice and I, we were always in an awe of them, you know. That was our family, you know.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
What year was that arrangement done? Do you recall?
Let's see, that was during the time I was at Dillard. So that was between 51 and 55. I went to Dillard in 51, graduated in 55.
So you came on right after my mom graduated in 1950.
Yeah, I guess so. So it must have been around like 53, 54.
Okay.
Something like somewhere in there.
So, Mr. Dickerson, what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I just came out of Preacher Man, and really there's things that's kind of left over yet to be done. Xavier University just did in late, February, early March, a full production of my Preacher Man, the 3-act, 11-scene musical. It's a comedy that John and O'Neill and I finally got done.
Oh,
You know, we've been working some years on this piece, but I finally got the full score done in 2013, and we had some hopes of having it done up northeast there at one of the schools up in Massachusetts, because he was artist in residence. John O'Neill was at the time. That didn't come off, but Xavier did do the premiere of it here with Ashe. That's where it ended up. Started out much grander production and with thoughts of having it at a much bigger venue, but many things didn't work out in terms of the funding for the production. So, but nevertheless, they did a great job. And so with the students and I got to get the work on stage, and then there's nothing like that to seeing it finally on stage, because you can't tell anything until it's really up there and where cuts are to be made and that sort of thing, you see. And so now there's some things I see I need to do for the work. One of them is to score some of the pieces for concert performance. As a matter of fact, there are two pieces I'm working on right now. Then they're two spirituals, because I have some gospel music in the musical. And I've been wanting to have a gospel choir on the concert stage with the symphony for some time. And so now I've got these two pieces, and I'm doing a concert arrangement of these two pieces for gospel choir and symphony orchestra. Now, in addition to that, I've got I've sat on the side, put it on the side when finally Xavier said that they would do the production of Preacher Man, Preacher Man. That came at a time when I was almost to the end of my Congo Square, Symphonie Congo Square, which was a piece about Congo Square here in New Orleans. And I need to complete the final part of that, which is one of the key portions of that piece. And so that's something that's looming right there for me. As soon as I finish these arrangements, I need to get to that and finish that up and get it done. And of course, as I mentioned before, you know, they're pieces, they start writing themselves even before you get to them. Now, I've got stuff I'm doing, but there's a piano piece that's coming, I know, that I'm going to write as soon as I finish the Congo Square piece. And I know the title already and everything, you see. Well, I can't tell anybody that yet, but
okay.
These pieces can start by themselves, you see. And so, and of course, this one is starting with me. Sometimes pieces start with other people or organization, and they'll come to you and ask you to write something for them. And so that's how some pieces get started.
Amazing. You know, I mean, that's a lot of good stuff happening. I can't wait to continue to find out what that is. What advice would you give young people today?
Well, I would say to all young people, no matter what you're doing, to consider what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And make a connection of the things that you come up with your heart. And by that, a connection of that's beyond just intellectual considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes one can't quite puzzle it out, well, how I'm going to live or do this or the other. But if your heart is in it and you really want to do it, because that's the key to doing anything, even if it's one of the other kinds of considerations that is primarily intellectual, somehow, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to try to get your heart in it. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty terrible. So I would say, you know, to make that kind of consideration, and then and in that consideration, see what connections there are between what you're doing and how it helps your fellow man. I mean, if what help that is, how it can contribute to others. Uh, um, uh, Let those be the beginning considerations.
Some great advice. Thank you so much. Mr. Dickerson, I want to thank you for this enlightening conversation. You are more than a legend. You are an inspiration to me and so many others. I want to thank you for your everlasting contributions to New Orleans, our culture, our legacy, and the world. I humbly appreciate you. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me.
Thank you for inviting me and as a guest on your series, Legends of New Orleans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The pleasure's mine.
Most definitely. Until next time, everyone, this has been Anything and Everything. Stick around. There'll be a treat from Mr. Dickerson.